Hello and welcome to the next in our ongoing series of podcasts. This one is entitled Rebuilding After the Crisis. Of course, is brought to you by the Florida Housing Finance Corporation and the Mortgage and Credit Center. I'm John Little, one of the managing partners of the Empowerment Consortium, have over 15 years of professional experience as a manager and trainer, working in the housing industry with nonprofit organizations as well as banks and local government agencies. I'd like to introduce to you one of my other presenters today, Ms. Cora Fulmore.
Hi, my name is Cora Fulmore and I'm with the Mortgage and Credit Center. I've got about 30 years of experience in the mortgage and credit counseling business and pretty excited about today's presentation that we're going to provide to you today. Our other partner in crime is Mr. Shane Darrisaw. Shane?
Thank you, Cora. As Cora mentioned, I am Shane Darrisaw, one of the managing partners of the Empowerment Consortium. Also, over 20 years of experience in the industry, working with nonprofits, financial, and other organizations in the financial industry. John?
So thanks, Shane. One of the things, of course, we want to talk about is after the foreclosure crisis, which we're still in the midst of, dealing with some of the after effects of that crisis. And Cora, one of the biggest things that we need to talk about, of course, is rebuilding credit for individuals. We have some information on some of the impact that a foreclosure and the foreclosure action has on an individual's credit score.
You're absolutely right, John. You know, foreclosures are affecting thousands of individuals in the state of Florida, and we know that there are going to be many individuals who will need help in rebuilding their credit. And who's the best source to go to than a trusted advisor,
Absolutely.
Someone in the counseling industry? So I feel that this particular podcast is not only exciting but provides a lot of information to those individuals who may be working with families who have had some issues with their credit and they've gone through a possible foreclosure and now it's time to rebuild.
Right, and that's really, Shane, when we're talking about rebuilding, we understand that there's going to be some impact on an individual's credit, but we also know that this is somewhat of a temporary situation, that we can always rebound from any kind of credit challenges we've had in the past, especially a foreclosure. While it seems like it's a traumatic event, and it is, it's certainly not the end of the world.
Right, and that's what we have to get counselors and individuals that are being impacted to focus on. In a lot of cases, it's just going to be a starting point to rebuild again. And how do we deal with that transition? So as we go through today's podcast, that's what we want to focus on.
So, Cora, when we're talking about the actual impact of a foreclosure, what can a consumer expect when it comes to their score? What kind of impact is the foreclosure and the activity leading up to it going to have?
Well, definitely, John, without a doubt, an individual who's going through a foreclosure is going to have a decrease in their score. Their points are going to go down. I mean, that's just a matter of fact. There are things, though, that an individual can do in order to rebuild their overall credit standing, and I think it's important that we talk about those things to do in order to rebuild. But the most important thing, I think, is the number of points that a foreclosure will have on one's credit score.
Right.
And that number of points is pretty enormous. I know we've done our research in trying to determine how many points will an individual lose if they're going through a foreclosure. And I think, Shane, you found out some pretty interesting information today in the research.
That's true, and we looked at it. There were two different groups, if you will, and I don't want to get into the actual groups, but those were those individuals that had the higher credit scores and those that had the medium to average credit scores, and the impact is different on both of those. And then the range, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, was somewhere on the low end, 80 points, on the high end, 160 points, depending on which group you're in terms of if you had a very high credit score versus a middle to low credit score.
And I think another factor in that, Shane, is the leading up to just the foreclosure action itself. What was the range of things when you're going 30 days late or 60 days late? All of those somewhat have a cumulative effect on the score. Is that right?
That is correct, and I think with in the 30-day range, the impact was somewhere in the neighborhood of 45 to 60 points, and once we got into the 60 to 90-day range, the points would actually increase. So we were having this discussion about the build up to the credit impact, and you brought up some interesting points about that as well.
Yeah, it's a lot of times it's the actions that lead up to the actual foreclosure activity that have a more dramatic effect on the score. We're talking about when you're going 30 days late on a mortgage or 60 days late on a mortgage. All of those factors impact the overall score on an ongoing basis. So when you actually get to the foreclosure activity of maybe being at a 600 score, it could have another detrimental effect where it could chop another 80 or whatever off of the score itself. So you could be looking at something in the lower fives just based on that activity. But if you had a 780, you could be down a few hundred points based on all the late payments that had accrued.
You are absolutely right. I think our most important thing, if we're working with counselors, is how do I then deal with the consumer who walks in my door who have had some credit challenges because of a foreclosure, and also realizing that if they're having a problem because of a foreclosure, 9 times out of 10 there are other obligations that are delinquent as well that we will have to deal with. I think it's then important then that counselors understand what are the factors that are involved in the whole credit scoring model, and how do you then work toward those factors in building or rebuilding a person's credit score.
Absolutely, and I think one of the things that we discussed previous to this podcast is counselors are going to be experiencing something different and unique than they have been in the past, and they're going to be probably dealing with what's been historically a more educated and financially savvy clientele. So there's going to be a little bit of a shift in their mentality that's going to be required, understanding you're dealing with a new population, a new client base, so you can't just do the same things you were doing before. You have to learn to talk to people in a different way so they'll be able to receive the message the right way.
Also, it's going to be important to understand what their trigger points are going to be in terms of that new clientele that you're talking about. That's someone that is a little bit more educated, may have some pride issues about what they want to share with you, what they don't want to share. So it's going to be important that counselors understand, in terms of how to be able to get the message across without offending that new type clientele.
Right.
That's a very important point, Shane, and I'm glad that you mentioned that, because often when we're working with clients in the counseling industry, the mindset of the counseling industry often is that we're dealing with low and very low income clients, so they're pretty accepting of whatever we give them. But if we're talking about a new population, and that new population is a little bit more sophisticated in financial matters, and they also understand credit, it's a total different picture.
Yeah, and that's the great thing about the amount of information that's out there. A lot of people understand credit a little bit more, but as counselors, you are that professional voice. And while somebody may come to you and say, I understand credit, I know how credit works, I know why my score was what it was, and I want to get it back there. As the professional and as the counselor, it's really on you to share with them the bigger picture. And it's not just about controlling a few factors, it's understanding everything that goes into the scope of rebuilding somebody's credit, especially when we're talking about foreclosures, rebuilding somebody's rental history, being able to track that rental history, establishing a realistic timeline, and saying, hey, just because the foreclosure was done, you're looking at a time period of doing the right things right on a consistent basis over a time span of maybe 2 years, maybe 3 years, before you're able to get back to that credit score where you were. And that's a hard pill to swallow for some people.
It is. But I think in this next section, when we present the second part of this particular presentation, we'll be able to get more in detail in covering what are some steps that the counseling agencies can take.
Absolutely.
All right.
Absolutely.
And I also wanted to add that as counselors, when they are dealing with the clientele that may be a little bit more sophisticated, that they stick to relaying the facts and not, what they heard someone else say. It's going to be important that as counselors that they do the research so they can be able to cite the examples that actually come from the sources of the credit reporting agencies as they go attempting to help the clientele that they deal with.
Right. And that's going to be the key thing is sharing those facts. So in this next section, we are going to talk about some of the actual tools that you can use and some of the steps you can take to help clients rebuild their credit after the crisis.